If you're wondering why we are all smiles, guys, it's because we're coming to the end of football season. Now, we're not excited that it's about to be over, but it's like the holiday season, guys. It's playoffs. We're in the state semifinals. We're about to preview Westfield and Stonebridge, still alive. Welcome to this all-new episode of the Fairfax Sports Report. I'm your host, DJ Kubarulis, alongside of the local scribes, John Marcario and Paul Frummel, these guys of the Connection newspapers, and from the Fairfax County Times, Dave Buschenfeld down there on the end, the sports editor there, guys, and he seems to know the most about football. Stay tuned if you want to see Dave's record and how he crushed us all with his knowledge in our Pick'em poll. But before we do all that, let's get to the folks that make this show possible. Of course, it's CCI Screen Printing for all your screen printing needs. 703-978-0257. Thanks to CCI Screen Printing. Hey, we're on the web. Check us out at www.fairfaxsportsnetwork.com. All news stories, Q&As, rankings, and some video as well. Some more video on the way, and you can find out more about our games of the week and when they'll be showing on your local listings. Before we get too far along in the show, there is a story up on the website at fairfaxsportsnetwork.com, and we want to get a chance to tell the folks in the Great Falls community and in all of the northern region about Nick Cafferkey, a young man that the boys and girls basketball teams at Langley will be honoring. In his honor, they'll be playing a doubleheader. Nick was paralyzed in a beach accident over the summer. He was visiting the beach with his family and some unfortunate events. Well, anyway, to help foot the bill for Nick, the Langley boys and girls basketball teams are going to be getting together, guys. They're going to be playing a doubleheader, and they're going to be raising money. Go to fairfaxsportsnetwork.com. Check out that story and how you can help Nick Cafferkey. But for now, let's jump into football, guys. And, of course, when you talk football in the northern region, who do we talk about?
Westfield.
Bulldogs.
That's right, Westfield High School. And this is what Westfield has done in the playoffs. They drubbed by South County, a team they beat early in the regular season. They also eased by West Potomac 41-7, and a big win over West Springfield in the finals. This is the Northern Region Finals. They were able to take West Springfield out. West Springfield, a team that had shown some promise. Of course, we had the Renners on, Bill Renner, the coach at West Springfield, and his son, Bryn Renner. They were on the show with us early in the season, talking a little bit about, how things had changed at West Springfield. Everyone knows them to be a highly offensive team, but that might have been their defense that suffered down the stretch. But when you face Westfield, guys, they make anyone's defense look bad. Mike Glennon, quarterback at Westfield, who joined us on our last episode on the Fairfax Sports Report, is going to be joining us by phone in just a minute. But Paul Frummel, this is what they did by quarter against the Spartans.
And notice that first quarter, West Springfield actually had a lead with seconds left in the half. Westfield did get those 20 points in the second quarter, but it took a last-second touchdown pass from Mike Glennon to give the Bulldogs the lead going into the locker room. And then second half, third quarter, fourth quarter, as you can see, 16 points, 15 points. It was all Bulldogs from there, and they won easily.
And, John, the reason we put that graphic up is to show the folks, look, West Springfield is a team that showed promise. They were, they were in control at one point in this game. I think that a lot of people didn't give them enough credit. You certainly believed in the Spartans this year, and I think they showed their mettle against a tough Westfield team.
No, they did in the first and second quarter. They just seemed like they were a little too quick for Westfield in the sense that Westfield hadn't faced a team that quick all season long. I mean, going through the Concord District, very strong, brutal conference, not really the quickest. But after the second quarter, Westfield just adjusted very nicely. Their defensive and offensive lines completely took control of the game, and that's why they were able to cruise in the second half.
One thing on the flip side is I don't think maybe Westfield was prepared for the offense that West Springfield had. They were rushing three guys on the defensive line. And Bryn Renner is quick, he's got an arm, and he was cutting apart that defense. Now, Westfield did drop 3 interceptions there in the first half, but Renner was really handling the Westfield defense, something that no one thought would happen to the Westfield defense all year.
And I think a lot of people knew that going into that game, quarterback Bryn Renner, who's only a junior, by the way, coming back next year, kid threw for over 2,000 yards and about 700 touchdowns this year in that spread-out, no-huddle type offense. But the defense was they went up against a tough Westfield team. Personally, myself, I thought West Springfield's defense would have gotten them knocked out a lot earlier in the tournament. And to get just to that point, I think says a lot about West Springfield and how they were able to get to that point. Look, they won some last-second games against some of the Concord's teams to get to their third Concord team in the tournament. Concord is a tough district, guys. They've got 7 out of the last last 10 state champions. So you look at those factors and what West Springfield saw this year, a good season for the Spartans. Let's look at some of the leaders from that game, though. Let's go to Westfield and see what the Bulldogs did.
Now, that is not a typo, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Glennon only attempted 9 passes in the game, which I believe was a season low for him, though he did complete 6 of them for 87 yards and a touchdown. It was all about the running game for the Bulldogs. As you can see, Brian Kennedy, 13 carries for 192 yards and 3 touchdowns. Steve Tabbitt, 19 carries for 183 yards and 2 touchdowns. And fullback Brandon Farrell carried the ball 12 times for 71 yards and 2 scores. Just unbelievable job by the running game. And if you look at West Springfield's side on the defense, it's not anything new. Against Centerville, they gave up 238 yards rushing to Andrew Morgan in the first round. Peter Ferrara torched them for 158 yards in their second round game, so the defense really struggled against the run.
John, you look at Brandon Bailey, 40 yards, but that wasn't really because Bailey didn't have a good effort. It was more because they got back, they got down, and they had to pass the ball a bit more. Look, they always pass the ball about 50 times a game anyway, but Bryn Renner really carried the load here with 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, Renner was 17 of 30 for 256 yards and 4 touchdowns. As you said, did a very effective job in the first half of giving them the lead. And even the second half, he never gave up. They still scored late in the game. Even though they were down big, he kept pushing forward. Brandon Bailey, there you see 12 carries for 40 yards. He had some nice runs early on. I'm saying nice 5-6 yard runs because against the Westfield defense is nice. He also had 84 yards receiving those, so he also pitched in on other ways. Josh Vallejo, 7 catches, 74 yards, 2 touchdowns for the senior in his final game. Ran 2 extremely nice patterns to completely burn a Westfield cornerback and had some nice touchdowns. After the game, he was all tears, but he said he's extremely proud of his team and just knows that they're going to do big things next year.
And when you look at this game on a whole, we're about to go to the highlights. What you'll see is the gaping holes. And I don't really attribute that to a West Springfield defense that wasn't prepared. But Paul, a former lineman here in the northern region, you think that that line had a lot to do with putting up 522 yards rushing.
Well, I talked to Coach Keating, the offensive line coach, after the game, and I said, Coach, who do you want me to talk to? What lineman do you want me to talk to? He gave me all 5. And so I said, and I talked with all 5 linemen, and they said, you know, we just resolved that we were going to be better than them. We were going to break them. And he goes, I believe that we were tougher than West Springfield, and it showed. One thing you got to also point out is you talked about Brandon Farrell, the Westfield fullback, had 2 touchdowns for 72 and 72 yards. But the key while watching these highlights is most of these plays that Tabbitt and Kennedy scored on were dives, were lead dives, and Farrell was that lead blocker. So all the work that the Westfield offensive line did, Farrell also cleaned up anybody else, and you'll see Tabbitt and Kennedy aren't even touched most of the time.
All right, it's a happy day here on the Fairfax Sports Report for Paul Frummel, former lineman, but here's Bryn Renner getting the scoring action going early, John.
Yeah, pass it to Andy Stallings. There here you see just exactly what Paul's talking about. He got touched a little bit, but just completely up the middle, dives in for the first score of the game for Westfield.
And that is, of course, Brian Kennedy. Here's Glenn on a little draw play. Looked like a fumble, and West Springfield recovers.
Yeah, Westfield definitely had some problems early dropping the ball and fumbling.
And look at that pump fake by Renner, and he catches a receiver, John, as you mentioned, burned one of the Westfield corners.
Yeah, here you see a nice deep pass from Glenn. The one time he threw the ball downfield deep. Controversial catch right there, but it was ruled a catch on the 35 of West Springfield.
And you see just the speed of Brian Kennedy here. Again, he hasn't been touched yet. And that's also attributed to him and his speed. He was marked out at the 3-yard line.
Dove for the pile on there. There's Tabbitt, also had over almost 200 yards. 2 guys get almost 200 yards in one game. Not a good thing, but Bryn Renner was a good thing. Look at his ability, as you mentioned, Paul, as we were watching these earlier, to find the open man.
He's making time for himself, and he's finding the open man.
And you see Renner here, a couple of steps back, right over the middle. That's a touchdown, but dropped.
Westfield, again, I mentioned, they dropped 3 possible interceptions, 2 by Brian Kennedy, who was able to joke about it after the game.
All right, you see Tyler Bittenkurt there missed a kick. He doesn't do that very often on a field goal opportunity. The kid has been the best in the DHSL's history almost, besides Cincinnati Bengals' Shane Graham, who grew up in this area. And then you see there Tabbitt rushing for a couple of more yards.
Again, Kennedy right up the middle. Good cut there. Find the open seam, going in for the score.
Watch this pass. Beautiful throw by Renner.
And again, we're all showing all touchdowns. We can show them for hours. It was just a touchdown fest.
I like Renner's ability to use the pump fake. That's not something that you see a lot.
Now, this kickoff return by Tabbitt set up the Bulldogs' last drive of the second half. You can see the result right here.
Ross Lavin gets the catch at the 40 and runs all the way to the end zone for a last-second touchdown.
and that put the Bulldogs up for good going into the locker room.
All right, Tabbitt right up the middle, and as you see, wide open holes. It's a running back's day. I mean, any time you get holes like that, and this is something that was planned, guys. When Glennon only throws 9 times, it's something they obviously saw on tape to go after. Look, they've got the best quarterback possibly in the metro area, and they decide to run the ball with 2 backs that have been equally as good, and good for Stephen Tabbitt, who has taken kind of a back seat this year to Brian Kennedy to get some yardage.
See West Springfield's first drive of the second half ends in a safety.
Second time for Vallejos, just completely burning the cornerback there for a touchdown. Very nice up and under move.
And it looked like something they talked about on the sideline there. Every time he pump faked, Renner did. Vallejos wide open. Here's Kennedy. Look the way he keeps the ball close to his body. You'll see that a little bit later by Tabbitt as well. It's just good running and just wide open, guys. And you talk to
Again,
the line.
Notice that lead blocking of Farrell, number 48. Just watch him lead block right there, knocking out. These are 6-yard gains if he's not there, and that's a huge deal. And you can see why Kennedy and Tabbitt ran for almost 200 yards apiece, over 500 yards on the day. The offensive line told me their goal, 400 yards. They got that by the third quarter.
Here's Glennon again rolling out. Touchdown pass there.
2-point conversion, actually.
Was it a 2-point conversion to Lavin, the tight end, who they seem to like to use, guys?
The last 2 scores for Westfield were Farrell both. The big lead blocker gets his chance to be in the end zone twice.
Okay, so we see the highlights there, and what we were able to show was the gaping holes. And we're not taking anything away from West Springfield. We're giving something to Westfield. And I want that to be clear here, because Westfield's line has been the reason that, or the unsung reason, besides the Glennons and the Kennedys and the Tabbitts and even the old guys, Eddie Royal and Sean Glennon, who are now gone and in college. They've always had a strong line, Paul, and you know, having played line for Verbanek, who's now at Westfield, that is something that a Verbanek coach team will always have a good line.
And it's Coach Keating from on the offensive line coach. He gets at it, and I was joking. I was joking with the offensive line that Coach always used to beat me down every day, and they laughed and said, "Oh, he still does that." He's a great coach, and he knows what to do, what to say to get his line pumped for a game. And they knew coming in this was going to be their game. And every single person I talked to after the game, from Glennon to Verbanek to all 3 running backs, had a big game. The first thing they said was, "I got to give it all to the line." I mean, in unison, the 3 running backs said it was the O-line. That's who had the best game.
You know who's got the best game here on the Fairfax Sports Report? That's Win Ellington. We're going to jump to Win Ellington now. Win Ellington, a color analyst for the Fairfax Sports Network, has seen Westfield a few times, as the Fairfax Sports Network has seen Westfield and been at their games. Let's jump to Win Ellington now in the FSN newsroom. Win, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Westfield should expect in their upcoming game?
Well, BJ, I tell you, the playoff news is just swirling here in the FSN newsroom. Westfield has a big matchup next in their semifinal game against Oscar Smith of Chesapeake. They're traveling all the way down to Chesapeake, so they're going to be the road team this time. But Oscar Smith has some definite challenges that it presents to Westfield, primarily at the wide receiver position. The Tigers have 3 Division I prospects at wide receiver, led by his name is Kerry Boykin. He's a Maryland commit, 6'1", 200 pounds. Also, Todd Harrelson, who is committed to North Carolina, and Jamil Wilson. The Oscar Smith offense is led by, ironically, their quarterback's name is Philip Sims. So, Westfield had a big matchup last week against a tough offensive team, a tough passing attack. They'll go against another one this weekend. It should be a tough game for them. And one of the factors in how they defend against them is Brian Kennedy. We talk about Kennedy's ability at running back, all the touchdown he has, his breakaway speed, but he is also a very talented outside linebacker, and I'm sure his ability to put pressure on the quarterback will be an important factor in this game, but also how much he's used in coverage with that kind of speed he has. And then it's going to be a challenge for that Westfield secondary led by the speedy Tucker Carl, and then also very important for them to win the game in the trenches. They got you're talking about their offensive line, which had such an excellent game against West Springfield, and then their defensive line too, led by Murphy Latua, also Chris Leon, Lamar Wosu, and Brendan McDonald, another important player on that Westfield defensive line. So it's going to be very important for them to win the battle up front and to put pressure back on Philip Sims. And then, Westfield's just been the complete team this year. I mean, offense, defense. They gave up 34 against West Springfield, but, they've had 5 shutouts this season. So I think sometimes maybe their defense gets overlooked throughout the whole process. And then their offense, too. We talk about their quick strike capability, but they're really very effective in driving methodically down the field with Johnny Pickett, Randy Johns, and David Crutchko, and then with Tabbitt and Kennedy alternating carries. Oscar Smith undefeated as well, 13-0. So this is going to be one heck of a matchup. Back to you, BJ.
All right, Win Ellington getting it done for us in the FSN newsroom. Got to thank Win for all his insight and knowledge. And if you want to read more about Win and Win's ability to write about the games, go to fairfaxsportsnetwork.com. Every week, Win does an FSN Game of the Week recap, where he recaps all the action on our Fairfax Sports Network Game of the Week. Obviously, Westfield and West Springfield being one of those games. John, tell us a little bit about West Springfield, how their season ended, and you've gotten a chance to talk with some of the Spartans.
Yeah, they had 10 wins this season, most in school history. I think on paper, if you're already looking ahead for next year for West Springfield, they've got to be one of, if not the team to beat in the Northern region. They return absolutely every single key player, statistical leader from this team on offense. They have a lot of juniors that did an exceptional job. On the defensive side, I know they gave up 58 points to Westfield, huge number, most points in VHSL history in a championship game, but they're going to have another year to mature. So coming back next year, they return so many players on paper anyway, they should be the team to beat.
One thing I want to agree with John, it's surprising, but I do want to agree with John that I think of this West Springfield team as of the Westfield team last year, the team that was young, but did surprisingly well, surprised a lot of people, that offensive, the defensive. And I think West Springfield should be one of the top teams next year.
All right, that's next year. We're this year, and we're rolling on with Westfield in just a minute. Quarterback Mike Glennon of the Westfield Bulldogs is going to be joining us by phone on the FSN hotline. He's going to talk to us about Oscar Smith, what they've been doing to prepare for Oscar Smith, and we're going to give you the lowdown on Oscar Smith. Let's jump right into the preview of the Division VI state semifinal. When you look at it, it's going to be 3 p.m. this Saturday at Oscar Smith High School. That's in Chesapeake for all you folks traveling. Go to fairfaxsportsnetwork.com for more of that information. Paul Frummelt, though, look at the Westfield Bulldogs and Oscar Smith Tigers. Both teams are 13-0.
Obviously 13-0. Westfield had a PowerPoint rating of 33. Their opponent's combined record was 70 and 72. Points for is 507. They only allowed 97. And obviously the player watch would be NC State recruit Mike Glennon, obviously. For Oscar Smith, I have a few extra notes here. Wynn mentioned Philip Sims, their quarterback. He threw for 2,521 yards, 30 touchdowns in 13 games this year, and mentioned his top wide receiver, Todd Harrelson, has 46 catches for 892 yards and 13 touchdowns. So their offense, definitely a powerful offense. They scored 39 points in their first round game of the Eastern Region Tournament, and then scored 17 points, beat Salem 17-9 in the finals.
And they've had some success in the Eastern region, but I was talking to you guys before the show. So you look at the teams from the Northern region, 7 out of the last 10 are state champions are from the Northern region. So a 13-0 record in the Beach area isn't as much as a 13-0 record from this area. So while they have a lot of recruits, as Wynn mentioned and as Paul mentioned, unless he is the Phil Sims, I don't know if they're going to be able to go punch for punch with Westfield and Mike Glennon. Dave?
Well, one thing Wynn touched on, Westfield struggled a little bit in the passing game against West Springfield, maybe got exposed a little bit, and as Wynn said, Oscar Smith has a lot of good wide receivers. That could be a problem for Westfield when they head down there on Saturday, so we'll have to wait and see.
One thing that definitely does worry me about Oscar Smith is, something we haven't mentioned, is their defense, and especially their run defense. Again, Westfield is a very balanced team, and they don't have to run, but they should be able to run a little bit. But Oscar Smith, in their first round against Bethel, they held Bethel to minus 18 yards rushing. And that was Bethel's Jontel Evans, who rushed for 1,400 yards over this season. He was held to just 27. So every other rusher was held to like minus 40. And then you see you have against Salem, Kevin Whaley for Salem is the Hampton Roads all-time leading rusher. They held him to 63 yards on 17 carries. Their rush defense is pretty good. One person I want to mention is lineman Tamara Gray. He has had 16 sacks this season, 8 coming in the last 2 games. And they also have extremely good linebackers, so it's something that really should worry Westfield.
All right, so Oscar Smith has some studs. Westfield's got some too. Let's go to our player cards. Hey, it's Mike Glennon, the guy we're all talking about. John Marcario, tell us a little bit about Mike Glennon.
Yeah, Glennon this year, 139 completions on 212 attempts, 8 interceptions compared to 30 touchdown passes, a nice little 4-to-1 clip, 2,126 total yards passing. He rushed 25 times for 112 yards, had 4 rushing touchdowns. As people say, he's got a little more quickness than one would think for a quarterback and a big fella. The NC State recruit's going to need to pass the ball a little bit more than 9 times, though, in this state semifinal game.
And then you look at Steve Tabbitt next, one of their 3 running backs that had a great game on Saturday. Carried the ball for just under 1,100 yards this season, scored 13 touchdowns, including 2 of them last week. He needs to have a big game for them, keep control of the clock.
And you look at Stephen Tabbitt, and he's just one guy that's gone for over 1,000 yards. You know, Brian Kennedy is another weapon in the cupboard there. Speaking of weapons for Westfield, we've got Mike Glennon, quarterback of the Bulldogs, on the phone on the FSN hotline. Mike, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Here I am.
Hey, Mike, here you are. It seems like you've been on FSN quite the bit over the last couple of weeks. Had you on for our last episode. We want to thank you for joining us here on tonight's preview episode of the state semifinal. We're talking a little bit about Oscar Smith and some of their weapons. What do you guys know about Oscar Smith, and what do you expect?
Well, always teams down in the Virginia Beach area, they're always very fast, very athletic, and I think that's the case for this Oscar Smith team. They have great athletes who play. Obviously, their receivers are the big-time players, but also up front and just all around. They have very good athletes, and I think a lot of times these teams get characterized as undisciplined, but I think they're a little different than most teams, and that's probably why they've made it this far. So they're a very disciplined team. They seem like they have great coaches, and I expect it to be a very tough game.
Mike, what was your reaction when you were looking at the tape and the coaches came to you and said, you're not going to really pass the ball a lot today, you're just going to be doing a lot of handing the ball off? I mean, were you surprised with that? Did you accept the role? And what was your reaction?
Well, going into the game, we saw that both Robinson and Centerville were very successful on the ground. So, I mean, it doesn't really bother me. I mean, I don't really care who gets the credit, and I think that's the same case whenever we need to pass the ball a lot. That's just what it takes to be a good team. I mean, you can't have selfish players at all, and as long as we won 58-34, I mean, winning a Northern Region championship is a lot more important to me than my stats.
Mike, we've been talking about your offensive line. We've given them a lot of love. I'm going to give you the opportunity to give them some love. How big have they been for this Westfield team?
Well, it all starts up front. I mean, they probably don't get enough credit, but I mean, all of them. We have a lot of guys that don't start but still play a lot, and every single one of them has done a great job. 522 yards on the ground. I mean, you're not going to do that with any running back without a line. So all the credit really goes to them. I mean, our running backs know that it all starts with them, and just all around, offensive line and defensive line, they probably don't get enough credit.
Now, Mike, back in 2003, you watched your brother Sean quarterback Westfield to a state title. You got to see him do that. How much has that experience, watching him win the state title, motivated you, and how much will that be an advantage for you going down there this weekend?
Well, there's a lot of us have brothers that were on that state championship team, so we really know what it takes to get down there. And, I mean, all of us would like to be able to tell our brothers that we did the same thing as them. So that's one thing. And then at the same time, we've learned that it's very tough. And we learned, I mean, they played a Virginia Beach team, so we kind of learned their style of play. I mean, they can be it's a little different down there than it is up here. So, I mean, it's just everything goes into it. So I think that's definitely an advantage that we have that some teams may not have. The experience of maybe not playing it, going this far, but seeing it with a close relative.
Mike, before we let you go, why don't you take us into the locker room with you? How are you guys mentally preparing for a team that does have a lot of recruits, a lot of guys with big names down there, and they've beaten some big teams down there? How are you guys mentally preparing? Are you guys trying to are you playing any sort of underdog role? I mean, that's kind of hard to do at 13-0. What's the psyche like? How do you get psyched up when you've had so much success this year?
We're just preparing just like it's any other game. I mean, we just know that it's a little tougher team, and we're going to have to play a complete game, 4 quarters, every single minute. I mean, it's going to be a battle for 40 or however long games. I don't know. And we just know that it's going to be it's going to be tough, and we're just going to do whatever it takes to win. I don't think we're approaching it any differently than we have since day one.
Mike, one thing I want to talk to you about is when I followed Chantilly last year and when they went to the state final, and there was one player, Brandon Hogan, on Osborne, and Coach Lally told me that, watching film, you just couldn't get how fast he really was. You just couldn't get how good they were as a team. Is that something that worries you? Because the only knowledge you have of Oscar Smith is in the film. Is it something where you just got to trust your coaches and know that they're going to put you in the right position to win this game?
Definitely. I think we definitely have the best coaches in the state, hands down. I don't think there's any coaching staff in the whole state of Virginia that does a better job preparing us for the opponent. And I mean, I'm sure they are probably a little faster than what we're used to up here, but I think coaching can outdo athleticism. So, I mean, obviously we're going to have to play fast, and we're going to have to expect them to do anything. They got great athletes there. At the same time, we just need to play our game and let our coaches do the game planning and just play against or whatever they tell us to do, just execute.
Mike, you guys have certainly been good at executing all season, 13-0, heading into the state semifinal, and could be heading to the state final. All right, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but Mike, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck down there this week, and we'll be talking to you soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Mike.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mike.
Mike.
So, Paul, you make a great point. We all knew about Brandon Hogan last year. Chantilly all knew about Brandon Hogan last year. You saw him on tape, but in person, the guy was of mythological proportions, what he was able to do. 6 touchdowns in the state final. Now, we're only in the semifinals here. And there are some guys that maybe Westfield gets caught staring at on tape and maybe in the game saying, wow, that's the guy, that's the big guy. But on the flip side of that, is Oscar Smith pointing at Mike Glennon and saying, that's the guy?
No, exactly. They could be pointing at Mike Glenn, but then they're not pointing at Stephen Talbot, and they're not pointing at Brian Kennedy. Then they're not pointing at some of these defensive players. So yeah, that's the thing that's interesting is you really don't know what Oscar Smith is capable of because they don't play the same opponents that Westfield does. They don't play the same style as Westfield does. So all you have is tape, and it was a big thing. Coach Lai talked to me about last year. Is like we knew Brandon Hogan was good. We saw the tape. But you can't even imagine how fast he got from his stance to the line. It was something that really surprised them, and it's something that Westfield has to watch out for. But one thing that Mike mentioned, and when I was talking, when Mike answered my question, you got to trust what your coaches know. You got to trust that your coaches will put you in the right position to win. And one thing I've noticed from Westfield this year, covering this year and last, is, of course, they have a great coaching staff. We talk about how good Verbanek and his coaching staff is, but something Verbanek tells me every single game. We put a game plan in, and the kids bought into it. That's one thing about coaching that you don't realize sometimes is you need the kids to buy into the system, and that's something that these kids do. That's something that Mike Glennon and these kids do, so it's a huge thing, huge help for coaches.
All right, here's the game plan we're putting in. Monica Moore is going to join us in just a second. We hope you'll buy in. Stick around with us here on the Fairfax Sports Report. And when we come back from that, Division 5 recap and preview. Mickey Thompson from Stonebridge is going to be joining us by phone on the FSN hotline. On to volleyball. Come on back for more here on the Fairfax Sports Report. Welcome back to the Fairfax Sports Report. I'm your host, BJ Kubarulis, alongside of volleyball analyst Monica Moore. And volleyball ended a couple of weeks ago, but some teams that went all the way to the state tournament. Monica, some teams you followed all year.
Well, thanks, BJ. Volleyball has come to an end this year, but before we talk about all the news from the state tournament, let's take a look at my final rankings for the season. And no surprise who's on top, Langley, the Northern Region Tournament champions, and followed by them in the number 2 spot, Chantilly, who was the Northern Region Tournament runner-up. In the 3rd and 4th position, we have the other 2 semifinalists from the Northern Region Tournament, Centerville and Stonebridge, and rounding out the list is Jim Boer's Westfield team. But let's talk about the state tournament. And as the 2 finalists in the Northern Region, Langley and Chantilly were our 2 representatives this year. And in their quarterfinal match, Chantilly squared off against Cox High School from Virginia Beach. It was a very experienced Cox team. They had 6 seniors starting, and Chantilly lost a heartbreaking 3-game match. They were led by sophomore Samantha Reeves, who had 7 kills and 6 service points. And while it was a tough loss for them, Chantilly will, of course, be back next year with those 5 sophomores that started this season. Now, Langley, on the other hand, became the first team from the Northern Region to win their quarterfinal match. They beat Princess Anne, and then they beat Godwin Mills in the semifinals. Thanks, BJ.
Well, Godwin Mills is a team from Richmond that has been pretty good over the years, but Langley's been a team, as you mentioned, that was their first Northern Region team that ever made it that far, and it's pretty good for a Northern Region team. I guess when you're looking at Langley's season and what they were able to do, Monica, you know, they made it all the way to the big show. Yeah. That's difficult, and Sue Shiflett and her daughter Megan over there at Langley able to pull it together. And, you know, they were, look at them, they ended up ranked number 1 with a 23-2 record. And, you know, when you look at what they did as a whole, they blazed a new trail for volleyball in the Northern Region.
Well, they absolutely did, and Megan Shiflett set the Virginia High School record for career assists with 1,920, and she's also second on the list for career assists with 306, so she has been sensational. Her teammate Lisa Scott is 4th on the list for blocks, so they are phenomenal. Congratulations to Langley.
All right, and we want to thank Monica Moore here on the Fairfax Sports Report for all of her great coverage of volleyball throughout the year. Monica brought unprecedented coverage to all the good volleyball players here in the Northern Region. So we want to thank her for that. When we come back, we're going to have more football action for the Division V recap and the Division V preview. Mickey Thompson of Stonebridge will be joining us by phone in just a minute. Come on back for more here on the Fairfax Sports Report. Welcome back to the Fairfax Sports Report here on the Fairfax Sports Network. I'm your host, BJ Kubarulis, alongside of John Marcario and Paul Frummel, these two guys of the Connection newspapers. And down there on the end, it's Dave Bushenfeld, sports editor of the Fairfax County Times. Every week we bring you more football action, and it's no different this week than Stonebridge. Stonebridge headed to the Division V semifinals, and I believe 3 out of 4 of us here on set at the beginning of the year said Stonebridge and Westfield would be going to the state finals. We're not quite there yet. It's the state semifinals, but we'll show the folks at home exactly what happened in this Northern Region final, a rematch of last year's Northern Region final. Edison down 7-13 in the second half. And you see Edison scores again in the third. Stonebridge matches that score, a scoreless fourth. And the Bulldogs of Stonebridge, coached by Mickey Thompson, who will be joining us here on the FSN hotline in just a minute. They take the 27-14 victory. Dave Bushenfeld, a couple of heroes for Stonebridge. When you look at some of the leaders for the Bulldogs, no surprise, some of the names we've seen all year.
Yep. Mickey Thompson's son Patrick was the quarterback, went 11 for 17 for 173 yards and 3 big touchdowns, 2 of which went to Matt Irwin, you see there. And Ryan Moody caught 3 balls for 52 yards and a touchdown.
And you see Moody, a guy that's had over 1,000 yards receiving this year, a touchdown for him in the region final for Division V. So this pushes his team into the state semifinals for Division V. They'll be hosting a home game against Phoebus. We'll get to that in just a minute. But John Marcario, why don't you show us what Ben Barber and the Eagles did?
Ben Barber, very pedestrian-like numbers, 12 of 21 with an interception, 95 yards passing. It could have been much more. He had a couple of long runs that were called back from a holding, had 2 receivers open for big gains, one of them for a touchdown, just overthrew him a little. Stiff wind blowing, kind of pushed the ball out, passing for both teams, kind of offed it a little bit. Hakeem Perry there, 5 rushes, 33 yards. He was limited for most of the game. He had a long 17-yard rush in the second quarter. Aside from that, he was held in check seniors last game.
Is there anything other excuses you'd like to throw up there in a graphic
Mother
format?
Nature!
My goodness. Stonebridge won this game, or did Edison lose this
I'm
game?
giving nuggets.
Were you guys there? Who
I
else
was
was
there.
there? So did you see the same game he
I
saw?
saw the same game. The big stat from that game was that Barber was held to only 58 yards rushing, and he did fumble once. That fumble led to the first Stonebridge touchdown. Mickey Thompson said they really wanted to keep him inside, get him from stopping from running out outside, and they really held him in check for most of the game.
And we're going to go to the highlights in just a minute to show you that they were able to do that. Ben Barber, though, has had a fantastic season. He's thrown for over 18 touchdowns and rushed for 14. Guys, this is a wide receiver that switched positions and led his team back to its second consecutive Division V Northern Region Final. Let's go to the highlights, show the folks at home some action from the Fairfax Sports Network Game of the Week. And there's a quick pass out to Irwin for a touchdown right there on the left pylon from Thompson.
That just looked like a defensive breakdown right there. He was wide open.
So King Competitors one big rush he had in the second quarter, upended though. Nice play though for the Eagles.
There's Thompson rolling out of the pocket, and he again goes to Irwin, who seemed to have a pretty big day there, but the official does rule it a touchdown, so his second of the day. Here's Ben Barber throwing it over the middle, and a great catch there for Corey Washington, who was just swallowed up by some Bulldogs.
Yeah, Barber to Corey Washington was big. Here's Brandon Suggs, came in for one play. This was it, touchdown pass to Corey Washington. Kept Edison in it there in the third quarter, but here's a big, long pass that just kind of put the game out of reach for Edison.
And a great catch and a great play on the ball by Ryan Moody. Over 1,000 yards for him receiving this year, Dave.
Moody is such a matchup problem on the outside.
Yeah, there you see their little jump pass Stonebridge tried to have on fourth down. Edison defense was ready. Here's Ben Barber. Again, had the middle open, but big time tackle there by Gouveia.
Every time someone from Edison touched the ball, there was a Gouveia or someone else there to make them pay for it. That one, though, dropped just near the end zone. Thompson would have thrown for another touchdown. Here's Barber, converted wide receiver, playing quarterback, and doing quite well, Paul. This is a guy that was recruited at wide receiver, bringing his team back to its second Northern Region title game.
People that are faithful of the show, which should be everybody, know that I was very critical of Ben moving to quarterback. I thought that he's such a great wide receiver. He's just a playmaker that he should stay at wide receiver. But I saw Edison play recently, and I'm completely converted. That man needs the ball in his hands at all times because he just makes things happen for this team. Again, when you have a defense like Stonebridge, it's going to be much tougher. But Ben Barber is so special. And John has said it all year, and I didn't really believe him until I saw him play. He just makes plays, and it's extremely important to have the ball in his hands.
All right, and one of our Fairfax Sports Network faithfuls, JKH, every week comments about the Edison Eagles, and he made the same comment, Paul. You said, on the website this week, you can go check out JKH's comments at fairfaxsportsnetwork.com. He said, hey, I agreed with John. Edison played a good game, but Stonebridge was just a little bit better, and I think that tells the story. I don't think there was any sort of domination going on of any means. I think that it was a good game. I just think Stonebridge was the better team this year. Edison, though, was the better team last year.
One thing that is so key this year compared to last year is Jaron Gouveia was hurt last year. He didn't play in the playoffs. And so you see the difference, what happens when Jaron Gouveia is playing and playing at the top of his level.
All right, in just a minute, we're going to get a chance to talk with Stonebridge football coach Mickey Thompson. He's going to tell us all about the upcoming matchup. And, of course, they're going to be matching off with the Phantoms of Phoebus. When are they going to be doing that? Well, they'll be doing that on December 1st at 1:30 p.m. in Ashburn at Stonebridge High School. And the Fairfax Sports Network will be there. The Bulldogs at 12-1 facing off with the Phantoms. Let's go to the breakdown. Paul Frummelt, tell us a little bit about these Phantoms.
I mean, you see the Bulldogs right there, that one puzzling loss to Robinson. They're 12-1. Their PowerPoint rating is 31.7. Opponents' combined record 80-77. Did play in Division V, which is a little down this year. But points, they've scored 527 points, only allowed 180, and of course, got to watch Jaron Gouveia. The Phantoms, obviously a powerhouse down there in the Eastern region. Their PowerPoint rating is 33.8. They scored 478, only allowed 106. And running back Sean Alston is the player to watch for the Phoebus Phantoms.
All right, you look at Phoebus. They're a team that has shut out 5 of their last 7 opponents. They're allowing 5 points a game in the playoffs. And you mentioned Sean Alston. That's a guy that you've got to watch for the Phantoms. One key win for the Phantoms that I think tells the story of how good they are. Early in the season, in the regular season, they shut out Hampton. Hampton's a team that is one of the most storied programs in the history of the VHSL with 14 state titles. So this is a program that shut out the big dog. You never really know what kind of year a Hampton's having, but I think that tells you a lot when you look at quality of opponents. Speaking of quality, Dave Buchenfeld, the Phantoms are going to have to look out for Jaron Gouveia, who's a guy that has had the heck of a season for Stonebridge.
Well, when you think about Stonebridge, you always think about Jaron. He does a little bit of everything for them. As you can see there, he rushed for 600 yards and 14 touchdowns, caught 13 balls for 317 yards and 5 touchdowns, even went in and played a little quarterback when Patrick Thompson was out with a thumb injury. He's a verbal commit to Virginia Tech, awesome player on safety. He really does it all for that team.
All right, and speaking of someone that does it all for his team, Mickey Thompson is joining us on the FSN hotline. Mickey Thompson, the coach of the Stonebridge Bulldogs. Mickey, are you with us?
I am.
All right, Coach, we've done this quite a few times over the last couple of years, and that's because you're always taking your team to the playoffs. Tell us a little bit about what it's like winning the Division V Northern Region title and now heading in against a Phoebus Phantom squad that has had a heck of a season.
Well, this is why you coach. I mean, it's an awesome thing to play in the playoffs and take your shot. And it's this is when football is fun for us.
Coach, it seems like in championship games, it's the team that makes the most plays is going to be the team that wins. You had Jaron Gouvet and Moody make some big-time defensive and offensive plays where it seems like Edison's offense and defense just couldn't make the big play. How important was those plays that they made, and just for your team to go out there and get the big gains and the big plays in the big game?
Well, I thought we had a few more playmakers than they had, and they were really relying on a couple of guys, and we had 4 or 5. And so I think the catch by Moody and the catch by Gouvet, the 2 fade routes, were huge plays in that game.
And speaking of their playmakers, Ben Barber, obviously he's a great athlete. What did you do during practice during the week to try to get your team in the mode of defending Ben Barber?
Well, we had Terrence Glenn. He came. He was actually home from college, so he acted like he was Ben Barber in practice, and it gave us just that quick, elusive quarterback that we had to try to track, and I think it helped us as far as spacing and all that, and just try to keep him contained.
Terrence Glenn, last year's quarterback for the Stonebridge Bulldogs.
Now, Coach, you've been in this position before, taking Stonebridge to the state finals one time already. What are you telling the team to get them ready for this big game against Phoebus?
Well, the main thing is, and that's the same thing for coaching. You just got to go into this and, coach fearless and, take your shots and you never know how it's going to turn out, but you don't want to walk away saying you left a play on the sheet or you didn't make a play here or make a play there. You just got to let it go.
All right, Coach, you guys run a different offense, probably something that they have not seen down there. People have, since you guys have made the trek over from Loudoun and now in the northern region, in your first couple of seasons, no one had seen the tricky Mickey style offense, I like to call it. Now, teams have gotten used to it. It's still working, and of course, you've got the big athletes to back it up. You're taking that now against the teams from the South. They certainly have not seen anything like this, maybe on tape, but does that give you guys a little bit of an advantage?
Well, it depends from game to game. We played Matoka and in the semifinal, and they hadn't seen it, and they had no idea how to defend it, and we scored 50 against them. That's the big question mark. I mean, they're going to be well coached, but you still, you can't replicate it. So we'll see how well we run the single wing stuff. If we can't run that, we're in trouble.
Coach, how big is it for Phoebus to be traveling to Ashburn? How big is it to play at home in a big game like this?
Oh, it's really big. I mean, not to have to worry about travel plans, itinerary, getting people set up, getting a bus, all that kind of stuff. We can just concentrate on playing football and developing a game plan.
Well, Mickey, if things go your way, maybe you'll be concentrating on getting a bus for next week, right?
Oh, that would be awesome.
All right, thanks, Coach, for joining us here on the Fairfax Sports Report. Good luck in your game against the Phoebus Phantoms.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
Thanks,
guys.
Coach.
So, something that a lot of coaches in this area tell you when you talk about Mickey Thompson and Stonebridge, they run the single wing, and for those of you that are not familiar with that offense, it's almost like a ballet back there with the quarterback. It's all these pirouettes and turns and handoffs and inside handoffs and things that confuse high school kids, and it's hard to replicate that, and that has often given them the one-up on teams that they have not seen before. On the other hand, is Phoebus going to have the kind of discipline to stop an offense that maybe they have not seen before?
One thing that Mike Glennon mentioned when he was on the phone, a stereotype of the southern teams, the eastern region, is they're undisciplined. It's something that they gained, for the years and years before. There's better football being played at the Eastern Region. Obviously, they have the athletes and they're more disciplined, so it shouldn't be a problem. Hopefully, they might get a little bit of a one-up, but for Phoebus, a team that won the state last year, it shouldn't be a problem for them.
Dave, what are going to be the keys to the game for a Stonebridge squad that has been to the big show before and seems like they've come back empty-handed a few times?
Well, I think Mickey said it best. They just got to do what they do best, leave it all on the field. And if Gouvet does what he does and Patrick Thompson throws the ball around, I think they got a good shot.
You look at Gavea, Moody, a lot of playmakers. One guy that gets lost in the shuffle is a junior lineman there, Ed Wang. This guy, or excuse me, David Wang, the younger brother of Ed Wang, now at Tech. He's committed to Tech already. So you're Mickey Thompson, and if you got 2 kids going to Tech, your son at quarterback, you got to be feeling pretty good about your chances. On the other hand, though, John, down south, Phoebus, similar to Oscar Smith, the kind of team that probably has some prospects of their own.
I mean, it's nice to have games where you have prospects versus prospects because you get to see how they're going to play in a big game situation. One quick note about the game, it's actually at 2 o'clock. It was changed today from 1:30, so it's a 2 o'clock game. But one thing about Stonebridge's offense that just makes it so difficult to defend is Edison did a fairly decent job in the first half of guarding against it, but it's just so difficult and so many different options that by the third and even fourth quarter, it's just, you can only guard against 5 different players possibly getting the ball for so many times without just wearing yourself down. And that's where Stonebridge just gets you, is that late game fourth quarter where they'll just, a simple little pirouette that got 2 or 3 yards in the first quarter is now getting 8 or 9 yards. And when you get first downs late in the game, you're just smoking clock, and when you're ahead, that's money.
One thing that Stonebridge has lacked since Sean Ryan graduated a couple of years ago, he was a quarterback that went to Tech on a baseball scholarship. He had a good arm. Terrence Glenn, who replicated Ben Barber over the last week, had a pretty good arm, but not like Patrick Thompson. And Paul, you know that from having covered the team over the last couple of years.
Oh yeah, Terrence Glenn, obviously he was a great runner. He was a Ben Barber mold. He could scramble away, he could make room, and he could throw it when he had to, when he could place the ball. Now Patrick, I mean, it was just watching tape. I haven't seen him live this year, but watching the tape, he's got that arm. He can heave the ball down and let his playmaker wide receivers make a play.
Dave, on the flip side, I asked you the keys to the game for Stonebridge to win. Having seen them now already, did you see any vulnerabilities that Phoebus may be looking at hitting the rewind button on their tape in the coach's office?
I really don't think so. I was saying to the guys earlier that other than Westfield, I think Stonebridge is the most complete team that I've seen in the region this year. Interesting note, Phoebus is the team that beat Edison in the state finals last year. Wonder if after the game Vaughn Lewis was telling Mickey any pointers on this game coming up now.
All right. Well, speaking of pointers, I'm about to give you folks a pointer at home. Go to fairfaxsportsnetwork.com every week, and you can nominate an athlete of the week. Every week here on the Fairfax Sports Network, we honor one student athlete that has had a breakout performance over the last week. John Marcario, this week, we go to Brian Kennedy, one of 2 guys that almost rushed for 200 yards in the win over West Springfield.
Yeah, Kennedy, the Westfield senior running back, big reason the Westfield Bulldogs won the Division VI title over West Springfield 58-34 last weekend. He had 192 yards rushing in the game and 3 touchdowns against the Spartans in the Virginia AAA Division VI Northern Region Championship game. And as Paul said, as we've discussed, so many of those runs, he was either A, too quick for West Springfield, or B, nobody even could lay a hand on him. So he is going to be a big-time threat in the state semis.
All right, let's jump right into our FSN rankings. These are the final rankings, so this will be the last time that we see our top 10 here on the Fairfax Sports Report. So let's close out the season with some of these teams that did have respectable years. And of course, out of 35-some teams, here's the final 10. Of course, Westfield, from start to finish, I think that has probably not happened here on the Fairfax Sports Report in a while. Westfield, a unanimous number 1 every single week, 40 points. Every single week, a unanimous number 1. I think that says a lot about how good Westfield was. They took care of business all season long. Stonebridge, after the loss to Robinson, you see tied for 5th down there, took a little bit of a back seat to some other teams throughout the season. Not a unanimous number 2 all year, but pretty darn close to it. And West Springfield, John, I'll let you talk a little bit about the Spartans, the team you got to cover quite a bit. They finished the season in the FSN top 10 at number 3 with a team that we thought at the beginning of this year would have gotten one signature win and maybe left the rankings. And I think that their being at the number 3 spot at the end of the year says a lot about what West Springfield was able to do.
I talked to Coach Renner after the Westfield game. He told me, and it was very upfront, he said, I believe that you just saw the best 2 teams in Division VI play. And he was right. West Springfield's one of the top 2 teams in Division VI, and he goes, we deserve to be here, and that makes me feel pretty good. And it's right.
Who else deserved to be in the Division V final? Well, it's Edison, John, finishing the season ranked at 4th.
Edison finishes 4th. Ironically, they played in their 4th consecutive Division 5 Northern Region Championship game. They are now 1-3 during that span. And then tied for 5th, we have two teams. Madison had a breakout year for Gordon Live and company, fell to Edison in the semifinals. Still a very successful year for them. And then you see Robinson. They're way down in our rankings early in the year. Finished with a very average 6-6 record, but had the huge win and probably upset of the playoffs over Chantilly.
Now hold on, because they weren't just falling down in our rankings. They fell out of the rankings. And I don't think that says anything about the validity of our rankings. I think it says something about how strong the region was this year, or I should say how there was more parity this year when you looked at a team like Robinson, who didn't just beat Stonebridge. They dismantled Stonebridge in the early parts of the season, and at one point fell out of our rankings, guys. So it was a hot and cold year for Robinson, which gave West Springfield quite a run at the end of the year. I think what we saw out of Robinson was a team that developed so much from the beginning of the year until to the end of the year, and I think that says a lot about coaching. And coaching at Robinson, always going to be secure when you got a guy named Bendorf back there with a whistle in his mouth. Paul Frummel, West Potomac, kind of year did they have?
You can't say it's a disappointing year with the kind of year they had. Yes, they didn't make it as far as they wanted to, but it's definitely not a disappointing year. They had a great year, and it's funny you see Centerville right below them. Centerville had an amazing year from first-year head coach Jerry Pannoni. No one thought they were going to do anything. They were playing the underdog sleeper most of the year. They nearly beat West Springfield in the first round of the playoffs, so it's great to see Centerville there, right there at number 8.
Number 9, very surprising, Chantilly. They were the number 2 spot for most of the season, but after that loss to Robinson in the first round of the playoffs, they fall to number 9. And Marshall at number 10. I don't know if they were in the rankings at all this year, but they snuck in there after their performance in the playoffs.
Well, they had the best year, I believe, in Marshall history.
Right.
It was a great year for Marshall.
Yeah, I think they made the playoffs for the first time since I believe it was 1989, or maybe since the first time they played football.
One key, though, the coach told me was Marshall was the 4th seed in Division 5, so even if the playoffs didn't expand, they would have been in it, and he thought that was important to say.
All right, and you saw Centerville was a team that was ranked in our final rankings, and one more degree of separation there is that Mike Skinner was the defensive coordinator, former head coach of Centerville, but he also launched a lot of head coaching careers while at Marshall. Marshall, not a lot of people know this, was a powerhouse in the late 80s, and 1989, last time they made the playoffs, Skinner was there as a head coach. Skinner gets another team into the playoffs as an assistant coach, of course, with a lot of help from Jerry Pannoni, who was running the ship over there. So another degree of separation. There's your Coaching 101 here for the Fairfax Sports Report. All right, speaking of Coaching 101, records, keeping track of records,
Records don't
wins,
mean anything. They mean
losses.
It's how you perform at the end of the year. That's what matters.
And that's what mattered. In our final down the stretch, here's how it shaped up.
Oh.
The smartest of us all ends up being Dave Buchenfeld.
Ends up placing last.
27-12, Dave Buchenfeld, and he picked Westfield and Stonebridge to win, and of course they did. Now these were worth, for those of you that are really tracking these numbers, these picks were worth 2 points in the final parts of the season. Now I had to arrange it that way so that I could beat John. That was the only way I could do it. So I had to rig the system a little bit. John Marcario, you go over 2 this week, but we didn't have episodes for the last 2 weeks, and I got to throw this out there. This young man, this strapping young lad, went 8-0 over the last 2 weeks before going over 2 in the finals. So, John, 2 weeks of 4-0 where both of your upset picks came true. So you had a great final season stretch. Got to give you that one. But to Dave Buchenfeld now, before we get to Paul, who did lose our pick'em poll.
Well, losing is all relative.
It's all relative. Paul's going to give us a 30-second apology, but Dave's going to give us a 1-minute gloating on how he was able to do what he did.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank my parents. I'd like to thank God for my God-given ability. I'm just the man, what can I say? And I still maintain that if it wasn't for those Oakland games that I always got wrong at the beginning of the year, I would have been undefeated this season. So thank you very much. I want a trophy or something.
All right, we'll get you that trophy in just a bit. But John Marcario, let's jump into what's grinding your gears this week on Marcario's Madness.
The Virginia High School League will make a recommendation in the coming months to take Stonebridge High School out of the Northern region and place in the Northwest region. I say it's about time. Stonebridge is located in Loudoun County, miles away from several Liberty District foes. In this day and age of putting the high school students first, asking kids to travel 45+ minutes to a game is absolutely absurd. Now this area, every now and again, has some traffic problems, so you could face an even longer delay going to a game. And that's just one way. In the end, the VHSL was looking out for the best interests of its students and keeping Stonebridge and every other Loudoun County school, Loudoun Valley and Heritage included, out of the northern region.
All right, and that is officially the first time on the Fairfax Sports Report that anyone has said that the VHSL was looking out for their students. That's okay. They don't often do it. Maybe they did here. Who knows? Go to fairfaxsportsnetwork.com to read Marcario's Madness every single week at fairfaxsportsnetwork.com. Hey, we're thanking CCI Screen Printing this week because they're one of our teammates. 703-978-0257. Want to thank you for joining us here on the Fairfax Sports Report. Come on back every week for more updates, previews. Basketball's coming up soon, so don't go too far. And we want to tell you once again, go to fairfaxsportsnetwork.com so you can find out how to help Langley's Nick Cafferkey.